Hi, Janine Helton here. I wanted to start right out with an image of my palette and the colors I've used for your convenience. And this is the image we'll be painting from here. This little girl is a picture I found on Unsplash, so it's copyright free. I like to desaturate the photo, so we're just looking at the black and white version, and then I like to change it to this posterized version here, which helps me work layer by layer. Let's get started. Okay, so beginning with quinacridone gold, I just wet my brush and get some paint into the well here. I'm adding some water with my pipette. I want my value to be uh, very light, about 10%, and I want it mixed up really well. I just keep adjusting until I think it's right, and then I'll test that on a piece of paper to see if it's what I want. My second color, I usually use 3 colors to begin. I'm using quinacridone coral here. Same method here, just mixing the pigment and water really well. I want the value to be very similar to the value of the gold. And now going into peacock blue, I want a third puddle. And again, it may need a little more water than the reds or the yellows because blue is naturally a higher value. And I want them all to be very similar so that the first layer is a nice smooth blend. Mixing up really well. I don't want any little pieces of pigment to get on the face, on the flesh. And it looks like the 3 are pretty close in value. Maybe a touch more blue there. These are probably my 3 go-to colors. Sometimes I'll change the peacock blue and start with green, hooker's green. But normally these are the 3 colors I begin with. Occasionally I'll add a 4th. But this is such a small piece. We're working on a 5x5. Whenever you see me dab my brush, as you're seeing now on that sponge, I'm getting as much moisture as I can out of the brush because I don't want to introduce more water into the puddles that I've just carefully mixed up. So you'll see me doing that throughout. I don't mix in the palette, I mix on the paper for this first layer. Just let the colors meld together. Again, getting that extra water off before I move to the blue. I often will take the blues over the eye socket area or the shadow area. Occasionally I'll put it in the light area. It just really, it doesn't really matter for the first layer. It's just whatever works for you. I do like to get a little pink in the nose and mouth area. And we will be pulling this color into her hand as well. And I also want to think about being careful not to get color on her shirt because I may keep that light. So I don't want to get that messed up. You can use your brush as a straw or a sponge just by touching those beads that you see. When I'm ready to get rid of those, I can take a damp or a almost dry brush just to suck up those extra puddles so they don't bloom back. And here I am being very careful about going around the sleeves of her white or blue sweater. I'm not sure what it's going to be. And absorbing that excess bead. Okay. That really will just take a minute or two to set. It's not going to be dry, but because I'm going in with a lot stronger pigment and less water, I can control it. I do have to be careful not to let my hand touch the paper. I like to start with the eye creases. So I'm mixing up a nice warm, dark, and getting excess water out. I'm using a pretty small brush here. What am I using? I think I'm trying a very small sable. Again, this is such a small painting, I don't normally go to my small brushes at this point. But whatever works for you. I want it to hold paint, but I also want it to hold a fine line. I also don't want anything to be too perfect, so you'll see me softening edges as I go. Often I'll have a second damp brush like this. This is my number 8 Kolinsky sable. I'm just using that to maybe drop in another color or to soften an edge. And we're just doing the same on the other side, just starting to establish the darkest areas of the features. Again, starting with the eyelid crease. And trying to find places where I can lose an edge, soften an edge. That's going to go right into shadows, so. I also try not to have long, even lines. So here I've got a little break, and I'll just adding a little red on the inside of the eyes, the Scarlet Lake. Being really careful with this first area. I don't intend to finish the eyes by any means, but I do want to establish the shapes, and I want to get those right. But everything I do is in layers, so. I'm just taking a damp brush, just taking a damp brush and just dragging out the corners. You can see how dry that paint is. I'm adding a little water to that. And another dark area. I don't usually use this. I don't usually use this small Kolinsky sable, and the brushes or the bristles aren't really staying together very well for me. Again, I'm really just wanting to establish the shapes right from the start, get those right. Don't want to go too dark. Again, they are in shadow, so this looks a lot darker than it really is because it's against this very light foundation. But as I build the layers, it'll all kind of work out. So this is a Scarlet Lake and ultramarine blue mixture. I wanted to get a nice dark or warm dark or dark warm. I'm cooling off that Scarlet Lake, and which also darkens it, and I'm going to use that for her nostrils. And she's looking down, so there's not a whole lot to do here. I've got to be real careful. I don't want to make little bullet holes here. I just want to look at the shape of her nostril. The top edge will be hard and the bottom edge will be softened out. And even though, well, I'm working from a black and white, but even colored photos, the darks often look black or blue, and you have to remember this is flesh, and flesh is warm, so you're wanting to use a warm color. That ultramarine blue with the Scarlet Lake almost makes, can go into a purple if you put enough blue in it. But I'm wanting to keep this warm, a little more on the red side. I'm now establishing the corners of her lips and the line between them. And this is another area where you don't want to outline it, so just be careful of that. I like to, have almost a dashes and then connect it with water or another color for variety of value and variety of color. I think starting with the features first is very rewarding because you can already see this child coming off of the page. Pretty dark underneath her lip. And again, softening with the water. When you soften, you want to be careful that you don't eliminate the whole line. You're just touching the edges that you want softened. I'm dipping right into some orange and mixing it with what I've got on my palette just to give me a lighter, kind of a lighter version, I suppose. And I want to get the division between her fingers, which is quite a bit lighter because it's in the sun. Again, just tickling edges to soften things out. A little edge of her fingernail. It may seem tedious, these teeny tiny marks I'm making, but this is what's going to make it read accurately in the end. Go ahead and glaze right over the finger that's in shadow. Just again added water to that mix to lighten it up. Can always go darker. Trying to figure out what's her ear and what's going on over there, but her hair is dark, so I can pretty much just not worry about where that's going to go and just get some color on her ear and then soften it out. So just taking some peacock blue now and just putting in the edge of her cheek there to delineate it from her hand. I don't think or plan too much about the colors. I mean, you can see I have mixed some, I guess you could call them flesh tones, but I'm also using like straight blue here or straight orange there, because when you layer, you can always adjust the hue, the color. Working with children, I'm always extra cautious as well about not going too dark too fast, because it's easy to make them look old too fast. You don't want them to grow up too fast. You want them to look like young children. I've kind of pulled that right up into where her eyebrow will be. You know, as dark as the photo is, I've actually lightened the shadows on the reference photo. But even with that, I'm not going to be painting the flesh as dark as you see in the reference. But this is the shadow side. What I'm doing now isn't going to be nearly dark enough. Little by little. Thought it was time to just get some value on there. So nice big blue area in the shade, in the shadow. Grabbing some Windsor Yellow Deep, and I've added that to the mixture that was on my palette. So I've got color harmony all the way down the line because I just keep using what's on my palette, adding different colors to it. Everything will blend and harmonize. There's a little bit of a shadow here that I wanted to get. Not sure, I'm not exactly sure what's going on. I think that's part of her flesh and not her hair, so I wanted to get that in. I'm just doing some little shadow work. And her hair is darker than her flesh, so I don't really have to worry about that. Just added some Windsor Yellow Deep to the mix to get the edge of these, the shadows on her face, where it's real warm. And the cast shadow on her hand. Again, just establishing the shapes. You may want to have your posterized version on hand. It may help you when you're doing some of the layering in the shadows. But you're not going to want to rely 100% on that because there's a lot of nuances that you also don't want to miss. So just the important thing is to constantly be looking at your reference photo at the same time while you're painting, looking back and forth. Or you'll be in danger of just painting what you think you know rather than what's actually there. Quin Coral. I'm going to get some color on her lips. always looking carefully for the variations in value. You can see even though she's in the shadows, there's light hitting the bottom of her lip. And I also like to vary the color. So I did put a little blue in there. I am using what I call my pointy brush. It's my Trekell, I think it's a number 8. It's a synthetic. I, it has a super sharp point. So I am using indigo and Mission Red Brown. Mission Red Brown is in another container, not in my palette. But it makes a really nice black. And this little girl has black hair. But we're going to start with her eyelashes. And that point's going to come in real handy here, so I can just very carefully brush those in. Again, it's not going to be as dark as the final. I'm wanting to be really careful in getting it right before I darken it. And I'm going right into her eye, which is also very dark. Her lashes are over her eye. I do have a couple tiny dots of masking fluid here or there on her eyes, around her eyes. Really tiny dots. I don't like to do masking fluid, so if I do it very sparingly. But that'll help me keep a little sparkle between the eyelashes. Just grabbing some peacock blue, soften that down a little bit. And the lower lashes, again, just don't paint them all, just a few. And then soften those. And try not to evenly space them, which sometimes is not easy to do. So, really important to zoom in close and see the direction of the eyelashes and get that right. Basically, it's already wet. I'm just dropping color back in to where I've already worked to darken a couple areas. Now I want to get a few of those lower lashes here. And a clean damp brush. Back to my number 8. I think I'm ready to get some color on her irises. She's got some nice dark brown eyes. Another place to be really careful. The edges of the iris are very important to get them in the right place, to get them the right shape. I'm just darkening that brown with a little bit of that black mixture. And going even darker on the one in the shadow. A little cooler version of that dark brown. Throwing in a little green. I always look to find a place to throw in a little green or a little purple into a brown eye. Just make it interesting. Throw a little more indigo in the mix. Gonna grab a little more Mission Red Brown. Those two colors make a really nice dark. It can be a dark that leans towards blue and a dark that leans towards the brown. So we're going a little towards blue since her hair is black. And I just want to get started on some of this hair before we wrap it up. I would like to just soften areas so it's not so perfect. And this is a nice transparent black. It's not real heavy. Again, one of the brush you just saw had mostly just water on it. This one is the one with the pigment on it. Back to water. That way I can vary the value, get some blooms going. I especially like to get some blooms going on the hair. Gives it some interest and texture. Just not so much on the face. I like to keep that a little smoother, especially on a child or a young girl. Just like everywhere else, I'm just looking for the dark hair strands, the darkest areas of the hair, and I'm just getting those in. Might do a little negative painting around the lighter areas. And then I'm less fussy at the edges, especially in the shadow side here. So I'm just getting some color down there and then messing it up. So we're getting pretty close to the end of this first layer, where I'll just let it sit and then I can come back and assess it and see what it needs next. I usually work maybe about 45 minutes at a time, and this little one might take 4 layers, 4 sittings. Just, I could probably do it in 2, but because it's so small. But I do like to let it sit and let it dry in between. Just helps me to think. You notice too, I didn't paint all the hair. I'm just doing sections here and there. Same thing with that. I never want to try to finish anything in the first layer. I want to give it room to kind of sit and give me some time to think. And you just never know what ideas might come to me the next day or the next time I see it. And I just want to let that creativity happen rather than, going into it with a preconceived outcome, which is virtually impossible anyway. So I'm thinking of the direction of the little eyebrows, and then I'm softening it up. Again, keeping eyebrows pretty light for a child. dark eyebrows can make them look older. Before I stop, I just want to throw in, I've got some peacock blue, and I'm just wanting to hit the edges of this sweater, which is really hit by the strong lighting. So I know I'm a really slow painter, and I appreciate your coming in to watch me paint. I've got it, you may have noticed, I've sped it up in sections, and so it's quite a bit faster than real time, but hopefully you kind of get the idea of how I start a portrait. And normally I'd be working with a little bit more larger puddles of paint, but again, this is such a tiny painting. I'm just working with what I need. Getting the last bits. If you're not already aware, you might be interested to know that I do send out a bi-monthly newsletter where I write about all kinds of artsy things and inspirational things, my techniques, step-by-steps, my cats, birds, just all kinds of things. And so that's something and plus that way you find out everything that's going on. You'll be the first to know, and you'll be the first to see my new art. So here you can see the scanned image of my first layer. Thanks for joining me.